This video is about The Savage Detectives by Roberto Bolaño, a Chilean writer. Why you should read it and why I loved it. I can definitely see why a lot of people cite this novel as their favorite novel, because if this is your sort of reading experience, this rich celebration of a literary life or any way of life that incorporates reading as one of kind of its core tenets and practices, my God, this book has to be for you. And I can also see how rereading this novel would allow you to access it on a much deeper level, because on first read through, there's a lot that is sort of disorienting, the various perspectives and names and places and times. This is a novel for readers, and if you don't read very often, definitely don't bother picking it up. But if you do love reading like I do, if you love writing, if you appreciate poetry, if you appreciate prose, my God, will you love this thing. Bolaño's love for literature, poetry most specifically, but also his lust for it is so palpable throughout this entire book. And before I go any further, I should mention that I won't be giving away anything that happens in the middle or towards the end of this novel, because I definitely want you to experience that for yourself. But I will say, and I wish someone had told me this before I started reading the novel, there's a part about 100 or 200 pages in, after you finish the first part of the novel, where the format changes quite a bit, and you just have to be ready for that. You have to be ready for it, because it's going to be a speed bump. It's going to test your patience, but it is the price you need to pay to get into the heart of the novel. There are dozens, probably over 40 different perspectives, especially packed in that middle section, and hundreds of writers are mentioned, mostly poets, but also novelists too. There's a strong emphasis on Latin American literature. But what ties it all together, this is what I believe the novel sort of forces you to do, is the heart of it all. You can't think your way through it as easily. It's much harder to piece together what's happening and some of the exact relationships between people if you approach the novel that way. I suppose more deeply, even than being a celebration of literature, it's a celebration of humanity and of the human spirit. No matter who's talking, what's happening, or whose perspective we are seeing the narrative through at any given point in the story, we're always sort of orbiting around this group of poets called the visceral realists, who got together fictionally in Mexico City in the 70s. And there are two writers who are among that group who are sort of the main characters of the story. We're following them from these different perspectives throughout the novel. And those two are Ulysses Lima and Arturo Bolano. It doesn't give much away to say that even though a lot of these characters are poets or aspiring poets or just people who really appreciate poetry, we end up getting a lot more of just kind of their day-to-day lives, the sorts of things they're struggling with, the sorts of things they yearn for. It's definitely too early for me to say that Roberto Bolaño is one of my favorite writers, because this is the only thing by him I've ever read, but I will definitely be reading more of his fiction. I'm hooked. This was amazing. If you saw my previous video on this channel, you probably know how I feel about extremely long books, especially in this phase of my life. I just do not have the time to do justice by really long novels. But if I love them enough, if I love the writer enough, I suppose I'm willing to make an exception. 2666 is a book that I am now starting to consider. It wasn't on my list before. Not that I have an actual list, but you know what I mean. I want to read it. I suppose one of the things that I loved about this novel early on was this sense of almost fantasy and adventure, because the narrator at the very beginning of the book is pretty young and he's coming of age. He's studying at a university. He loves poetry. He's absolutely obsessed. And seeing him live his life daily, it's styled as though the beginning of the novel is styled as though the chapters are diary entries. It's just, it really took me back. It really made me reminisce about days when kind of the monotony of life wasn't weighing as heavily. That narrator is a dreamer, and he's sort of wonderfully aloof, and it's a beautiful way to get acquainted with the setting and a lot of the characters who are going to be featured prominently throughout the story. And it would be disrespectful of me not to mention that this novel is hilarious. There are quite a few moments of extreme levity, and the philosophy of a lot of the characters really amused me. There's sort of a tragic depth to a lot of the characters in the story, but even still, watching them sort of live their day-to-day lives and express that they're aware of the sort of ludicrous behavior that they're exhibiting. It's funny. It's quite an enjoyable experience. And I do really want to talk about the end, but this is not the video for that because, again, I mean, how pissed would you be if the video that you watched because you were thinking about getting into the book gave away anything about the ending of it? I guess just know that I really did appreciate the shape of the novel and how it all sort of came together by the end. I hope this video convinced you to pick this novel up. Certainly, I felt like it was a great way to be introduced to this writer, and it definitely won't be the last work of his that I read. I hope I live long enough to read more of his stuff. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. I'll be making book-related content on this channel indefinitely. Take it easy. I've got to get back to writing. I'll see you in the next one.